Do you know what it feels like when someone decides you need to be broken just to learn a lesson? When the person who's supposed to guide you becomes the one who teaches you pain instead? My name is Alina, and this is the story of how my stepmom wanted to teach me a lesson. But in the end, I became the teacher. If you've ever been silenced, underestimated, or made to feel small, this story is for you. Please like this video, subscribe, and stay till the end, because the ending, it's one you'll never forget. I was 12 when my father remarried. It wasn't sudden. He'd been lonely since my mother passed away, but I was still learning how to breathe without her. And when he brought her home, Ruxana, I remember thinking, maybe this is what moving on looks like. She was beautiful, elegant, her voice always soft when she spoke to him. But when her eyes landed on me, there was something sharp behind that softness. Like a blade hidden beneath silk. The first few months were quiet. Too quiet. She'd smile in front of my father, braid my hair, ask me about school. But when he wasn't around, her tone changed. Suddenly, my laughter was too loud. My clothes were too messy. And my face, she said, looked too much like your mother's. She'd say it like it was an insult. At dinner, if I spoke too freely, she'd give me that look, the one that told me to shut up. And I did, because I loved my father. I didn't want to ruin the small bit of peace he'd found again. But she wanted me gone. It started small. Forgotten lunches, missing books, whispers to my father that I was acting out. He'd scold me, and she'd stand behind him, her lips curved into the faintest smile. One evening, I came home from school and found my mother's photograph missing from the shelf where she always kept it, next to the jasmine vase. When I asked where it went, Ruxana said, "Oh, I thought it was time we stopped living in the past." Her words hit harder than a slap. That night, I cried into my pillow until it felt like I was drowning in silence. Years passed, and I learned how to live quietly, invisible. I kept my grades up, stayed polite, kept my head down. But the fire inside me didn't die. It grew quietly, like embers waiting for air. And Ruxana, she seemed to take joy in trying to extinguish it. By the time I was 16, she had convinced my father that I needed discipline. So he sent me to a boarding school. I remember standing by the car as he drove away, and Ruxana stood behind him, waving, smiling. Her voice still rings in my memory. Sometimes, distance teaches children respect. But I didn't cry. Not that time. Because in that moment, I decided something. If she wanted to teach me a lesson, I'd learn it. And one day, I'd return to teach her mine. The boarding school wasn't easy. It was strict, cold, and lonely. But I learned how to build myself quietly. I started writing poetry, essays, stories. And every time I poured my pain onto paper, I felt lighter. Words became my way of surviving. When I graduated, I earned a scholarship to a university abroad. Ruxana said to my father, "Let her go. She'll never survive out there alone." But I did. Not just survive. I thrived. I worked 2 jobs, studied harder than anyone, and by the time I turned 26, I had built a name for myself as a writer. The girl who once cried in silence now had her voice heard by thousands. I never sent pictures home, never called. But one evening, an email appeared from my father. He said he was proud of me, and that Ruxana wasn't well, cancer. Her voice, the same one that once cut me down, was now fading. He wanted me to come home. I hesitated. Every part of me wanted to stay away, but something inside whispered, "Go." When I returned, the house felt smaller. The walls that once swallowed my tears now echoed with emptiness. My father had aged, his eyes tired but softer somehow. And Ruxana, she was lying in bed, fragile, her skin pale like ash. When she saw me, she smiled weakly, almost unfamiliar. "You grew up," she whispered. Her voice wasn't sharp anymore. It trembled like it finally understood what pain feels like. For a long time, we sat in silence. Then she said, "I was wrong about you." And for the first time, I realized her cruelty was never about me. It was about her own insecurities, her fear of being forgotten. I didn't forgive her that night, but I did something more powerful. I let go. Because forgiveness isn't for the person who hurt you. It's for the person they tried to destroy a few months later. She passed away. I didn't cry, not because I hated her, but because I had already mourned her long ago. Years passed again. My father and I rebuilt something, quietly, gently. And one evening, at a book launch in Karachi, I looked out at the audience and saw him sitting there, tears in his eyes, pride in his smile. The book was titled Lessons from a Stepmother, and in it, I wrote, "Sometimes the people who tried to break you end up teaching you how to build yourself stronger." After the event, my father hugged me and said, "She would have been proud." I smiled, not because I believed it, but because I finally understood what peace feels like. I didn't need revenge. I became it through grace, through success, through silence. Because sometimes the loudest answer is a life beautifully lived. She wanted to teach me a lesson, but in the end, I became the teacher. You know, sometimes the hardest lessons aren't learned in classrooms. They're learned in silence, in the spaces between what was said and what was never allowed to be. When I came back home after years of being away, I thought I was returning as the girl they once tried to silence. But what I didn't realize was, I wasn't her anymore. The house looked smaller, colder, emptier, as if the ghosts of our past still lingered in its corners. I remember standing at the doorway, suitcase in hand, the air heavy with memories I thought I'd buried long ago. My father opened the door. His hair had turned completely gray. His eyes were tired, but when they saw me, they softened. "Alina," he whispered, like he was saying my name for the first time. He hugged me tighter than he ever had before, and for a moment, I felt like a child again, but only for a moment, because behind him, standing weakly against the wall, was her Rukhsana, my stepmother. The woman who taught me how to hide pain behind quiet smiles. The woman who made my childhood feel like a test I never signed up for. She looked smaller now. Her once sharp eyes were dull, her frame thin and trembling. I expected to feel something, anger, hatred, maybe satisfaction. But what I felt was nothing. It's strange, isn't it? How the people who once had power over you suddenly seem powerless when you've healed. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "You came back." I just nodded. "I wasn't sure you would," she whispered. The silence that followed was thick, like smoke that refused to clear. And I realized I didn't come back for her. I came back for me. To close the chapter that once defined me. My room was the same. My books, my old wooden desk, the window that faced the jasmine tree my mother planted before she died. The tree was taller now, fuller, its branches reaching toward the sky like it had finally found light after years of shadow. Maybe I had to. Over the next few days, I saw my father trying to bridge the years that had fallen between us. He'd make me tea the way my mother used to, with too much sugar. He'd ask about my writing, about the world I'd built far away from this house. Sometimes I caught him staring at me, his expression a mix of pride and guilt. And Rukhsana, she stayed mostly silent. Her illness had weakened her, but I could still see flickers of the old her, in the way she watched me, like she was measuring every word I said. One night, I woke up to the sound of her coughing. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to stay in my room. But then I remembered something. The way my mother would always go to me, no matter how tired she was, when I needed her. And before I knew it, I was standing by Roxana's door. She looked at me through half-closed eyes. For the first time, she didn't look like my enemy. She looked human, fragile. I poured her a glass of water, and when she reached for it, our hands brushed. Her skin was cold. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't say anything, but something inside me shifted. Over the next few weeks, I found myself helping her more, silently, carefully, cooking her meals, adjusting her blanket, reading aloud when she couldn't sleep. She never asked me why I was helping her, and I never asked her to apologize. But one evening, while the sky outside burned orange and gold, she finally spoke. "I wasn't kind to you," she said softly. Her eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. "I wanted to erase your mother, because I could never be her. I thought if I made you small, I could make myself enough for your father." Her words didn't surprise me, but hearing them out loud, it was like opening an old wound and realizing it had already healed. I took a deep breath. "You didn't have to be her," I said quietly. "You just had to be kind." She nodded, her lips trembling. "I know. I was cruel to you, Alina. I see that now. You were just a child." Her voice broke on the last word, and something inside me, the anger I'd carried for years, began to dissolve. Because the truth was, I wasn't here to punish her anymore. I had already won, not by revenge, but by becoming everything she said I couldn't be. As her illness worsened, I stayed by her side. My father would sit across from us, watching quietly, tears hiding behind his tired eyes. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at her, not with resentment, but sorrow. I think he realized too late how much he'd missed, how much he'd allowed to happen. One afternoon, while reading to her from one of my short stories, she suddenly reached out and held my hand. "You wrote this for me, didn't you?" I paused, unsure how to respond. The story was about forgiveness, about how the most broken relationships can still leave behind lessons. I looked into her eyes and said, "Maybe I did." She smiled faintly. "Then I've learned mine." That night, she passed away peacefully in her sleep. No goodbyes, no tears, just silence, the kind that feels both heavy and freeing at once. My father didn't speak for days. He'd sit in the garden, staring at the jasmine tree. And one morning, he said, "She read every book you ever wrote, you know. She kept them by her bed." I froze. He continued, "She said you were her biggest lesson." That moment, it hit me harder than I expected. Because maybe that was the truth. She had taught me something. Not about cruelty, not about pain, but about strength. About how even the worst people in our lives shape who we become. When I stood by her grave, I didn't feel victory. I felt peace, the kind that comes when the war inside you finally ends. I whispered, "You taught me more than you ever knew." And as the wind brushed past, carrying the scent of jasmine, I realized I had finally closed the door on my past. She wanted to teach me a lesson, but in the end, I became the teacher. There's something haunting about silence. It doesn't come all at once. It seeps in, slowly, filling every corner of your heart until even your thoughts begin to whisper instead of speak. After Roxana's death, the house felt emptier than ever. My father moved slower, spoke softer. Sometimes I'd find him standing in front of my mother's picture, murmuring words I couldn't hear. And even though I didn't know what he was saying, I knew what he was feeling. Regret. It's strange how people realize love only when it's gone, and guilt when it's too late. My father was a good man who made weak choices, and sometimes weak choices hurt more deeply than cruel intentions. For weeks, I stayed with him, not out of duty, but because I didn't want him to drown in his silence. He would sit in the garden every morning, staring at the jasmine tree, lost in memories. And I'd sit beside him, quietly, the way I always used to as a little girl when he read the newspaper beside me. Except now, I was the one holding him together. One morning, he said, "You have your mother's strength, Alina, but I see her kindness in you too. I have failed to protect that." I smiled faintly. "You didn't fail me, Papa. You just forgot me for a while." He looked at me, and in that look, I saw years of apology, sorrow, and unspoken love. It was enough. That's the thing about forgiveness. It doesn't erase the past. It just changes the way it lives inside you. After the funeral, I decided to move back to the city, to the life I had built on my own. My father promised to visit soon, but before I left, I walked into my old room one last time. The sunlight fell softly across the floor, and I noticed something new, a small box on my desk. Inside it were old photos, ones I hadn't seen since my mother's days, and beneath them, a letter. In Ruxana's handwriting. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. It read, "Alina, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know something. I was jealous of you, not because of what you had, but because of what you reminded me of. Your mother's love, her grace, her strength. I wanted your father's love so badly. I forgot how to be human. But you became everything I could never be. And that's how I'll remember you. Not as the girl I tried to break, but as the woman I couldn't." I sat there for a long time, staring at those words. The tears came quietly this time, not from pain, but from release. For years, I thought revenge was about making someone pay, but it's not. True revenge is peace. It's waking up one morning and realizing that the people who hurt you no longer have a hold on your heart. After that day, everything changed. My writing, it grew deeper, rawer, more honest. I wrote about pain, about survival, about finding light after being dragged through darkness. And people began to listen. My stories, my truth, resonated. They saw themselves in me. And maybe that's what I was meant to do all along. Turn my wounds into words. Months later, I was invited to speak at a literary event. I stood on a stage, lights warm against my face, hundreds of eyes watching. And as I began to speak, I realized something profound. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't afraid, because every scar I carried had turned into strength. I told them, when life tries to break you, it's really just trying to show you what you're made of. Forgive when you can, but never forget what it taught you. Pain is temporary, but what you build from it, that's eternal. After my speech, an elderly woman came up to me. She held my hand and said, "Your story healed something in me I didn't know was still broken." And in that moment, I realized I had become what I needed most as a child, a voice, a teacher, because maybe that's what all of this was for. Not revenge, not validation, but transformation. Years later, when my father passed away peacefully in his sleep, I buried him beside my mother. And as I stood between their graves, the jasmine tree in full bloom behind me, I finally felt whole. I whispered, "You both taught me in your own ways, and I'm still learning." The wind brushed my hair, and I closed my eyes. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim of my story. I felt like the author. She wanted to teach me a lesson, but in the end, I became the teacher. And that's the quiet truth of my life. The lesson pain never intended to give, but did anyway.